HMS Hood lay hidden in the Atlantic's crushing darkness for 60 years, its final moments a subject of fierce debate. Then, in 2001, a robotic camera descended 2,800 meters to reveal the ship's broken hull at 63 degrees, 24.247 minutes north, in the Denmark Strait. The long wait for answers was over. The silent evidence on the seabed would challenge the official story and provide a definitive physical answer to the central mystery. What catastrophic event tore the pride of the Royal Navy apart in mere minutes? For 2 decades, she was the symbol of British naval power, the largest warship in the world, built to be unsinkable. But in the icy waters of the Denmark Strait, the pride of the Royal Navy met its end in a blinding flash. On May 24, 1941, HMS Hood was struck by a single shell from the German battleship Bismarck. What followed was not a slow sinking, but an instantaneous, catastrophic explosion. In less than 4 minutes, a crew of 1,418 men was reduced to just 3 survivors. For 60 years, the question haunted the Admiralty. What force could tear apart the world's most powerful warship so completely? The answer, sealed in silence at 9,000 feet, would rewrite the history of that battle. The mighty Hood's fatal flaw was baked into her lines long before she met Bismarck. HMS Hood entered service as the largest and most powerful warship afloat, a symbol of British naval dominance. Her design, however, bore a legacy of compromise. Hood was already under construction when the Battle of Jutland occurred in mid-1916. That battle revealed serious flaws in her design, prompting drastic revisions that extended her construction by 4 years. The ship received thousands of tons of additional armor, thickening the main belt and strengthening decks over vital spaces without a full redesign. Those changes made her formidable against direct horizontal fire. The belt, angled outward to increase effective thickness, was intended to defeat flat trajectory shells. Yet the extra weight drove her bow lower in the water and reduced freeboard. In heavy seas, she shipped water forward and risked deck flooding. More critically, the partial reinforcements left uneven coverage. Over the magazines, deck protection improved, but elsewhere the horizontal armor remained relatively thin by emerging standards. The combination created a narrow but real pathway for a high-angle shell to reach the ship's vitals. By 1941, naval gunnery had evolved. Engagements often opened beyond 16,000 yards, where shells arced high and descended steeply. Hood's scheme favored side protection and accepted risk from plunging fire at range. Live firing trials with the 15-inch APC shell had already shown a dangerous route through the 7-inch middle belt and the 2-inch deck slope. Late in construction, 3-inch plates were added over the slopes near the magazine, and some secondary guns were removed to compensate, but proposed thicker armor, 5 inches forward, 6 inches aft, was never fitted. A comprehensive modernization was scheduled for 1941 to bring Hood up to the standard of rebuilt First World War capital ships. New turbines and boilers, upgraded secondary batteries, and reinforced deck armor were on the docket. The outbreak of war in September 1939 kept her at sea instead. Years of hard service took a toll. By the spring of 1941, worn machinery limited her to about 26.5 knots, well below her designed 32, narrowing tactical options against a faster, fresher opponent. So when Hood sailed to intercept the German breakout, she carried prestige and power, but also an architectural vulnerability and tired engines. The stage was set for a brief, violent test of range, angle, and timing that would unfold at first light in the Denmark Strait. At first light on the 24th of May, 1941, 3 minutes in the Denmark Strait began with gunfire. At 5:52, HMS Hood opened fire on the German ships. The action would run for roughly 8 minutes. Hood's captain ordered a turn to bring the ship's rear turrets into action. During that turn, Hood exposed more of her beam and aft quarter to enemy fire at a critical moment. Within minutes, a shell from Prince Eugen struck amidships, starting a fire. The blaze was visible, but initially non-critical, yet it offered a clear visual reference. At approximately 6 o'clock, its fifth salvo from about 16,500 yards. At that range, the shells did not descend in steep arcs. Their angle of fall was relatively shallow, unfavorable for penetrating thick horizontal armor, but still lethal if a path into vulnerable spaces could be found. Eyewitnesses aboard the Prince of Wales saw shell splashes near Hood, followed almost immediately by a colossal jet of flame near the mainmast. One survivor, leading sick berth attendant Sam Wood, recalled watching the orange flashes from Bismarck. A leading seaman with him remarked on how close the firing was getting to Hood. Wood later said that as he looked out, suddenly Hood exploded. She was one pall of black smoke. Then she disappeared into a big orange flash and a huge pall of smoke which blacked us out. The sequence was terrifyingly fast. A flash preceded an explosion that tore the ship in two. The bow section pointed out of the smoke, tilted vertically, and then slid beneath the waves. The entire event took about 3 minutes. The rapidity of the sinking left no time for evacuation. From a crew of 1,418, only 3 men survived. Ordinary signalman Ted Briggs, able seaman Robert Tilburn, and midshipman William John Dundas. They were pulled from the freezing water roughly 2 hours later by the destroyer HMS Electra. The engagement was not a prolonged exchange, but a swift, decisive break in the line of battle. It exploited a narrow vulnerability created by range, angle, and internal layout, rather than true, plunging fire. The official Admiralty communique soon stated that Hood received an unlucky hit in a magazine and blew up, and 2 boards of inquiry placed the cause near the aft magazines, with the second suggesting the 4-inch magazines likely ignited first. Without the wreck to examine, those findings rested on fragments of testimony and fall of shot plots, setting the terms of a debate that would persist for decades. With no conclusive physical proof, the 60-year debate took hold. The official Admiralty inquiries settled on a straightforward explanation. They concluded a 15-inch shell from Bismarck penetrated Hood's deck protection and detonated a main magazine. This one-shot, one-explosion theory offered a simple cause for the loss, yet many experts found it unsatisfying for the destruction of such a massive warship. The event seemed too instantaneous, too absolute. A second board of inquiry, convened under Rear Admiral Harold Walker, was far more thorough than the first. It took evidence from 176 eyewitnesses and refined the focus toward Hood's aft magazines, but it could not resolve the initiation. That depth of testimony kept the official line intact while leaving room for doubt. In the decades that followed, alternative theories flourished, dividing naval historians and enthusiasts. Some analysts proposed that a torpedo stored on Hood's deck was struck by shellfire. Its detonation, they argued, could have acted as a trigger for the much larger magazines below. Others pointed toward an internal accident unrelated to a direct hit. A fire in the 4-inch ammunition lobbies, or a cordite flare-up within one of the aft turrets, could have flashed down into the main magazine spaces. The central mystery was not whether a magazine exploded, but the initiation sequence. What specific event first breached the containment of the volatile cordite propellant? All theories relied on interpreting the same few, and often conflicting, eyewitness accounts from the Prince of Wales. Some survivors described a loud roar, while others recalled a relatively quiet flash preceding the cataclysm. Without physical evidence, each interpretation possessed a degree of plausibility. Hood's final moments became a historical Rorschach test, with different patterns drawn from the same limited data. Historians including Bill Jurens, William Garska, and Robert O. Doolin Jr. later synthesized damage mechanics, ballistics, and ship design. In a 2019 study, they concluded the most likely cause was a 380mm shell from Bismarck that penetrated Hood's deck armor and exploded in the aft 4-inch magazine, igniting its cordite propellant and then the adjacent aft 15-inch magazine. The rapid gas expansion would account for the violent ejection of the aft turrets and the structural failure of the stern. This debate was never abstract. For the families of the 1,415 men lost, the manner of death mattered. Closure depended on hard evidence, not inference. To find it, investigators would have to go where the testimony could not, down to the seabed. Descent into darkness began as a deliberate, first-of-its-kind search for Hood herself. The 2001 expedition led by David Mearns was a forensic mission, not a random sweep. It drew on decades of historical research and the last plotted position reported by the Prince of Wales. The search box was vast, but the team had a defined anchor point. Using side-scan sonar, they methodically raked a featureless plane nearly 3 kilometers down, the system sending acoustic pulses and reading echoes for any rise from the seabed. In the 39th hour of operations, a faint pattern resolved. Debris field. The first significant contact was not a ship, but a debris field. It stretched for over a mile across the seabed, a silent record of violence from 60 years before. The scatter of metal fragments indicated direction and force. Following that trail led the team toward the source. The lights of the remotely operated vehicle finally washed over a massive, recognizable form lifting out of the dark. The bow section of HMS Hood stood upright, largely intact, at 63 degrees 24.247 minutes north, 32 degrees 3.870 minutes west. As the remotely operated vehicle edged aft from the bow, the scale of destruction came into view. The bow and stern lay far apart. Midships, the zone of engines, boiler rooms, and magazines, was a tangled, inverted mass. The central structure had been torn open with extraordinary energy. Most telling was the stern. It was not simply broken away. It was absent from the main site. A separate sweep located the stern section at a distance from both the bow and the principal debris field. The wreck site was not a single grave, but 3 distinct sections. Each piece carried part of the sequence. The distribution immediately undercut ideas of a torpedo or a small, contained blast. Hood had suffered a massive structural breakup, with forces venting through the ship's interior. Localized damage scenarios did not fit what lay on the bottom. With the wreck charted, the mission shifted from search to examination. The site, designated a protected war grave, was designated in 2002 under the Protection of Military Remains Act, and the wreck would be studied with restraint, but with technical focus. What mattered now were the damage patterns, the shapes of torn steel and the precise points of failure that could speak clearly to what happened aft. Out on the bottom, Hood's remains described the event more clearly than any testimony. The wreck's silent testimony began with how the ship lay. The site resolves into 3 major sections: the bow on its port side, the vast midships block inverted, the largest piece, and the detached stern rising from the seabed at an angle. Their separation and attitudes define the forces at work when the ship vanished into the deep. The stern told the central story. Its break occurred forward of the rudder, precisely in the region of the aft 15-inch magazines, X and Y. Plating along the starboard side at the fracture is peeled and curled outward, not cut clean. That is the hallmark of an internal blast venting through the ship's side and up through machinery and ventilation paths, consistent with gases racing along voids and fuel tanks, rather than a simple hole punched from outside. There is more. The rudder remains in place and was found locked at roughly 20 degrees to port, confirming that a turn was underway when the magazines went up. That single mechanical fact fixes the moment. Orders to change heading were being carried out as the fatal sequence reached its end. The shattered midship's mass, flipped upside down, records the lift of a tremendous pressure wave. The absence of a clean penetration hole into the main magazine spaces argues against a shell detonating directly inside them. Instead, the layout of the aft 4-inch ammunition stowages above the big magazines offers a plausible path. A 380mm shell could have penetrated the deck, exploded in or near the 4-inch magazine, and the resulting fireball flashed down through trunking or openings to the adjacent 15-inch magazine. The rapid expansion of cordite gases then vented laterally and upward, blowing the aft turrets clear and tearing the stern free at the aft armored bulkhead. Critically, the hull sides show no sign of a torpedo strike. Goodall's torpedo detonation theory, long argued as an alternative, does not survive contact with the seabed evidence. What the wreck preserves is the fingerprint of an internal magazine event, complex in initiation but singular in outcome. Even the missing bow immediately forward of a turret hints at a secondary, partial explosion as the ship broke and sank, a late echo to the aft catastrophe. Taken together, these silent facts close the loop on cause and sequence, and they set the stage for what this loss ultimately signifies. What it signifies reaches beyond steel and blast patterns. The wreck of HMS Hood is more than a relic. It is the final chapter in a story of courage and flawed technology. The discovery provided closure to a 60-year mystery, confirming a catastrophic internal explosion in the aft magazines. Forensic analysis transformed speculation into evidence.